Over the past couple months, I've been adding in guitar pedals into my everyday workflow in the studio, and it's something that I have found so inspirational. And I've posted it on Instagram a couple times, and I get flooded with questions on what pedals am I using, why am I using pedals in the studio, how am I using pedals in the studio, how do you actually route your audio to the pedals, are they mono, are they stereo? And so in this video today, I want to answer all those questions and really show you why I'm starting to use pedals, how I'm using them, why I've chosen the pedals that are in my pedal board, and by the end of the video, you should have a full understanding. So there will be timestamps for each specific section. So if you want to jump straight to my thoughts on the microcosm, you can. If you want to jump straight to how I'm using them with MIDI, you can. There will be timestamps down below. So we're going to dive in and take a look. But before we do, my name is Austin. You're watching Make Pop Music. We have weekly tutorials on music and music production. So if you like this video, make sure you subscribe. We have these every single Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Other than that, if you want to support us after this, head over to our website, makepopmusic.com. We have sample packs, preset packs, MIDI packs. We have start to finish production courses, tons of free content. That is all in our description as well. Let's go ahead and let's dive in so we can talk a little bit about pedals. Okay, so number one, I want to go ahead and start with why did I start incorporating pedals into my daily workflow? I think something that I've been doing over the past year is just using more analog gear in general. I want to do a whole video about outboard compressors and preamps. And one of the things that I like about analog gear is you just get to be dexterous. You get to use your hands. You get to kind of stumble upon happy accidents. You get sounds that either are impossible in your DAW or just don't really make sense. And I love just sitting there and trying to crunch out a track in like 4 hours and be as efficient as possible. But sometimes I get lost in that workflow and it becomes really uninspiring very quickly. So what I wanted to do with things like outboard gear and pedals is allow myself to spend more time experimenting, get new and unique sounds, have happy accidents, and really take my sound design, take my engineering all to the next level. And that's not to say that you can't make a great record in the box with multi-effects and, you know, all of the software that we have. It's just a totally different workflow. Does it sound better? Maybe. Does it work differently? Absolutely. And so that's why I am using pedals. And you'll see as we go through my pedal board what I have in there and kind of why I've added them. But that's kind of been my mindset. Get off of the computer a little bit, create more in person, play guitar a little bit more, play synth a little bit more, use my hands a little bit more, and then just use my ears. It makes it so I don't get stuck in the same presets and the same VSTs and the same workflows. And I'm really, really enjoying it. And it's something that I think a lot more people should add to their studio workflow if you have the space and if you have the budget. So let's talk about number two. This is probably going to be the biggest section of this whole video and why most people click on it. And that is, how do I actually incorporate the pedals into my workflow? So I will talk a little bit about it. For my interface, I do have the RME UFX2. So what that does is that allows me to have multiple inputs and multiple outputs. And I have the Ferrofish Pulse 16 running as an ADAT unit. So total, I have 24 line ins. I think I have 24 line outs. I have a bunch of mic pre's, and then I also have some MIDI ins on the actual interface itself. So that will all matter very, very shortly. So let's talk about how I'm sending audio from my computer out to the actual pedals. This is the same also for like my analog gear. It's kind of the same workflow. So the way that I have it set up is over here, I can go to my audio connections, and analog out 3 and analog out 4 are going to my pedals. So essentially, if I want audio to come out to my pedals, like let's say I'm just playing this little Serum synth. Right now, we have that going to monitors. All I need to do is select pedals out, and then I need to come to my RME total mix and just make sure that my analog out is turned all the way up for 3 and 4. So you'll see pedals in right now. You're not hearing anything. Let me engage a pedal. And so now all of that audio coming out of 3 and 4, it's just coming out of my interface. I'll actually swap to a phone video so you can see this. But it comes out of my interface. It comes out of a patch bay. So right here, I have my analog 3 and 4 out. And then I'm just taking a cable from that, and I'm plugging that straight into the first pedal of my pedal board, which is the Onward. So the Onward actually takes stereo connection via TRS. So what I do is I have a TRS cable on one side, and then it splits off to a left and a right cable, basically having the tip on one side and the ring on one side. And that allows me to send out stereo information, send that to the pedals. If I'm using mono, I can always swap the pedal to a mono input, and it'll be totally fine. But that's basically how it works coming out of my DAW, and it's not that different coming out of all of my other sources. On my patch bay over here, what I've done is on the top, I have the outputs of all of my gear in my studio. all of my preamps, all of my mic outputs, all of my analog synths. I have the kind of line 6 modeling amp coming out of here. And so if I want to take anything to my pedals, all I have to do is plug into those outputs and take that into the first thing in my pedal board, which is the Onward pedal. So I can do that with literally anything in the studio. It's super, super seamless. And if it's a mono source, like let's say it's just a single mic or a guitar DI or the Sub 37, instead of doing that, what we call a breakout cable where it's CRS on one side and then 2 kind of 1/4 inch on the other, I just do 1/4 inch cable and it is completely good to go. And then on the back of the Onward pedal, or if I have Mood first, any of the Chase Bliss pedals have a switch that's called MISO. It means mono in, stereo out. Typically, I'm sending stereo to it, but if I am mono, I just flip that little switch and I'm good to go. One thing that I will say is that in the actual like Total Mix or, UAD console, whatever you're using to kind of monitor your ins and outs, just make sure that you have the dry over here completely muted, because what you want is you want to be able to hear the effects of the pedal. You don't want to be able to hear. Okay, so right here, this is a perfect example. Analog 3 and 4 is going out at full volume. But analog 1 and 2 is kind of how I monitor back. I have that all the way down. If I were to turn that all the way up, it's going to play me my dry signal from Cubase, and it's going to play me whatever the pedals are doing. That's not what I want. So I have it down so I can't monitor dry. And then I have it up so I'm just monitoring whatever the pedals are doing. Most of them have mix knobs, so if I want to dial it in from there, I can. So just a quick little recap. If I'm in my, DAW, I can just select pedals out. That's analog 3 and 4. That comes out of my patch bay from analog 3 and 4 and goes straight into the first pedal. If I'm coming out of my Juno, I just go out of the Juno out in my patch bay into the pedal. If I'm coming out of my Polybrew, I can just come out of the Polybrew output from my patch bay just straight into the pedal. It's basically the same. And that's why a couple months ago I wanted to incorporate patch bays, was so I could send anything to any other kind of modeling processor or preamp or pedal. So now I have complete kind of flexibility in terms of what's going where. Now let's talk about using these with MIDI. So if you're using the hologram pedals, they just take MIDI via like a 5-pin MIDI cable. On the front of my interface, there is a MIDI output, so I can just take that out. And if I was going straight into the Microcosm or straight into the Chroma Console, I can just plug that straight into the MIDI in. However, I have a couple Chase Bliss pedals, and Chase Bliss does not take 5-pin MIDI. They take MIDI via TRS, so very similar to like a normal patch cable. So what I have is I have this little MIDI box, and I can essentially have a 5-prong MIDI cable coming out of my interface, the MIDI out number 2 from my RME, that goes straight to the MIDI in of the Chase Bliss MIDI box, and then I have 2 outputs via TRS that go into the Mood and into the Onward, and then I have the MIDI through that connects to my Microcosm, and then my Microcosm has a MIDI out / MIDI through that will then go to the Chroma Console. So essentially, I have MIDI coming out of my interface, goes into the MIDI box, splits it up into TRS MIDI for Chase Bliss. It sends MIDI through to a 5-pin MIDI and then just goes straight through the Microcosm. The cool thing about pedals is they're basically a chain, so they do matter in order of how you put them because one process is going to feed into another. However, you can always just bypass them. When you bypass a pedal, it's like it's not even there. So let's say I don't want any of the Chase Bliss pedals. I only want the Microcosm. I just make sure that they're not on and then it goes straight to it. Same with the MIDI clocking. The MIDI will come straight through. And the reason that I'm using MIDI is because over here in my DAW, if I were to change the tempo, that's going to change how the pedals actually react. A lot of the pedals that I have are time-based, so they do glitches, they do micro looping, they do delay, they do reverb. And to have it synced with my DAW makes it super, super usable. Without sync like that, it gives you a lot of really cool textures and happy accidents, but it can be really hard to get 4 different pedals to sync to a tap tempo or just to sync to one tempo or to be exactly on. So if you want them to be so dialed in with your project, just have a MIDI cable come out and break them up into those. That's really the only thing that I'm doing. The other thing is that in your actual DAW, you just want to make sure that you turn on your MIDI destination. So you can see that I have MIDI FX ports all sending info. So basically any MIDI that I send is being clocked to that. There's also a lot of MIDI CC functions for each pedal. I haven't really gotten too deep into that yet, but you can essentially control every parameter of every pedal with MIDI CC automation. So basically the same way that you would tell Contact to add vibrato to a string, it'll control the Chase Bliss Onward, it'll control the Chase Bliss Mood, it'll control the Hologram Microcosm, and you can do all of that with MIDI CC automation. It's just so in-depth that could be a whole separate tutorial. So now that I've talked about how I actually route all that and utilize all of that, let's move over so I can actually show you what my pedals are and how I'm utilizing them and what each one of those sounds like. So here is a flat lay of my pedal board. So essentially the way that I have it is all of my audio is coming out of my patch bay or out of my sources, and then that's coming straight into this Onward right here via that one cable. If it's stereo, it's that breakout cable. If it's mono, it's just a normal 1/4" cable. And then we're coming straight out of the Onward and going into the Mood. And then once I'm done with the Mood, we're actually sending stereo out to the Microcosm, and then we're going to the Chroma Console. And again, the MIDI is just sending to all of these. So essentially, audio coming, audio to Onward, Onward to Mood, Mood to Microcosm, Microcosm to Chroma Console. And the reason that I'm doing that is because the way that these pedals work, the way that they kind of deliver sound, this is the workflow that makes the most sense for the sounds that I'm going for most often. So let's talk about this first pedal. This is the Chase Bliss Onward pedal. It actually just came out not that long ago. And this thing is crazy. It's essentially a dynamic sampler. And the way that Chase Bliss pedals work is they kind of have a specific layout. You tend to have two different kind of modules or characteristics. So on one side, we have our glitch. On the other, we have freeze. And then we have character modules. So the way that this works, let me play some audio real quick. So I just have that serum patch. Here's what it sounds like if I turn glitch on. Here's what it sounds like if I utilize freeze. And then, of course, you can dial in all of these crazy settings. So on this pedal, Chase Bliss will typically give you knobs up here. They'll give you 2 different stomps. And then you have these little toggle switches right here that can give different multi-effects. They can give different kind of rates. And then on the back, as I showed earlier, you have all of the dip switches. So this is not going to be a video that specifically will tell you everything about a pedal, because I could do 1-hour videos on each one of these. I do just want to show you them in action, though. So let's play around with this Onward for a second, show you a cool example, and then we'll move on to the next. Turning on glitch. So as you can see, this pedal right here gives you insane glitches, insane textures. It can be super usable, especially if you dial it in pretty subtly. However, you can just get some insane stuff coming into this pedal. Again, utilize all the features, go after the dip switches on the back, really get some crazy sounds. But let's go ahead and let's move on to the Mood pedal. So this is the Mood Mk2 from Chase Bliss. It's basically an ambient machine and kind of a micro looper. So on this side, you have your wet effects. So you have reverb, delay, and slip. And then on this side, you have what is essentially a micro looper. So it has a tape version, it has an envelope version, and it has a stretch version that you can use on the toggle. And so these kind of do similar vibes, but they do it in a completely different way, and they have completely different sounds. So the best way to utilize this one is, let me just show you. So you have your mix knob up here, same as this one. But here you have your clock. So that's going to change the pitch. It's going to change the rate. You have your modify and your length over here for what's essentially a micro looper. And then you have your modify and your time over here for what is essentially wet effects. So let's just go ahead. I'm going to mix it like 50%. So we've got a loop going. We can pitch it up. Slow it down and pitch it down. We can turn on wet. You can use just the wet effects. And again, these are all synced to my DAW, so right now they're at a tempo of 106. But this one specifically, when you mess with the time and you start messing with the modify, it's really going to mess with pitch and timing. Let's turn it to delay. Right now it's on that slip mode. Let's use that delay and let's use this micro looper. Let's turn this to envelope. We'll turn off the wet effects. Let's take it to stretch. So this pedal does some crazy stuff, also has a whole series of dip switches on the back. Let's move on to the next brand of pedals that I have, and that is actually a brand called Hologram. These two are from the same maker, and these two are from the same maker. So these are the ones that take MIDI via just the 5-pin MIDI. So again, we have from our DAW just coming out of our interface. These go into Chase Bliss. This comes into this MIDI goes out to this. So what's cool about this pedal is that it is so many different effects. You have micro looping, you have glitch, you have granules, and you have multi-delay, and you can use it as a phrase looper. And then as you slide, you can see that we're on Mosaic. They give you kind of 4 presets to kind of start from. We go to Haze, there's 4 presets. We move back, Glide. And this thing gives you absolutely insane results. I'll turn it to about 50% mix, and we'll play around. So there's our dry sound. Let's turn it on. We're on Glide. Let's move over to Sequence. You can change your LFO kind of envelope shape over here. You can change your time right here. Again, we are synced to the DAW, but this does allow you to kind of go into time divisions. You can turn down your activity, which will essentially make it a little bit more subtle. You can bring up your repeats. Let's move on to something like Mosaic. Let's go to the 4th setting, so this will sound kind of gnarly. I'm not touching it, it's just doing that on its own. Turn up the mix. Let's turn up the space, give it some reverb. Turn down the filter. And you can quickly see how fun pedals become. Again, I like these for the happy accidents. I don't like knowing exactly what's going to happen when I turn some knobs on here. Let's move on to something like the interrupt setting, and let's just hear that. Kind of giving me like a glitchy moment. Change the shape a little bit. Let me play it with the actual metronome so you can hear how good it is at staying on time. Move on to ARP. Let's move on to granules. Play with activity, play with repeats a little bit. It's kind of like a feedback knob. It just makes one sound stretch so far. So you can do so much crazy stuff with this. Again, I could spend an hour on all of these pedals because they do such insane stuff. Let's go on to our last pedal in here. This is the Chroma Console. This one is essentially a kind of multi-effects unit, kind of an effects suite. And the way that this works is it sounds nothing like it, but just think module-wise, kind of like something like RC20, right? So you have your first character module, you have your second movement module, you have a diffusion module, and then you have texture. So if we turn it on, right now nothing is on. We're in complete bypass. Even though the pedal's on, we don't have any modules engaged. Again, just to highlight it, I'll take it to about 50%. Let's play around with the character module. So we're adding a little bit of drive now. You can kind of send that amount up. Kind of do a tilt shift EQ. Really, really, really nice, kind of saturated, compressed, crunchy sound. Let's move this on to Sweeten. Sweeten kind of does like a little bit of compression and some harmonic saturation. This on some plucks or like a plucky guitar. So insane. Let's turn this all the way up. And again, that mix is only at 50. If we go to 100. Let's move on to fuzz. This is similar to like a fuzz guitar pedal. Super crunchy, super crazy. You can dial this in pretty hardcore. The cool thing is by having a mix knob here and by having an amount knob, the amount knob will kind of change the characteristic of the effect, and mix really allows you to control it like a parallel effect, right? So let's say we really like how much saturation and distortion that adds, but we want it much more subtle. That's not the same sound as this, even though we're just swapping the knob positions. Let's move on to howl. That's just like a brutal, I'm not gonna knock your ears off with that one. And then swell. This one's kind of funny to be in here. It sounds a little bit different. Kind of has like a side-chained compression kind of vibe. This on like a pedal steel or like a really ambient guitar, that would be nuts. Let's move on to module 2. We have a doubler. We have a vibrato that actually syncs to rate again with my DAW via MIDI coming out of here. Gives you like a really cool old like music box effect. Let's move on to phaser. I actually really love the sound of this phaser. Slow it down a little bit. We have a tremolo, again, syncing to the DAW. Speed it up. We have a pitch. This one's really crazy. We dial the mix back. And again, you can actually use all of these at the same time. You can use different combinations. You can kind of do whatever you want. We're not going to do that right now. Onto this diffusion. This essentially acts as kind of like reverbs and delays. So cascade. Kind of just a standard digital delay. Move on to reels, more like a tape delay. And you can see that as I'm moving the time, since we're in a MIDI sync mode, it's not giving you that like weird wind down effect that you hear in a lot of pedals like we heard in the Mood, because it's just synced to like quarter notes, eighth notes, dotted notes, etc. Let's move on to space. This is just a nice big reverb. Shorten it up. Cool little slappy kind of plate. Let's try that. We have collage. Collage kind of gives you like a weird multi kind of tap delay. Then we can go to reverse. This will control the pitch. And for the last module, we have our texture, so we have a filter. We have squash, kind of doing like a compressor kind of thing. And since this patch has a reverb kind of built in, it's doing that cool little sidechain compression. Then we have cassette. This is kind of like an RC20 vibe. This is giving you that kind of tape modulation and tape kind of like dropout. Then we have broken. Kind of working as a little glitch audio dropout unit. Not like cassette because it's not nearly as like harmonic and not as filtered. But it can be really, really crazy. Then we go to our last effect, interference. A nice little bit crushed, glitchy moment. Turn the amount down. And then again, with this pedal, you can save all your presets. You can do a bunch of stuff in the menu. But what's really cool is kind of mixing effects. So let's dial in a little sweeten. Let's have some tremolo. Let's do a little bit of reverse. And let's do a little bit of broken. I mean, that sounds crazy. You can do as much crazy stuff as you want with this. Then you can bypass it, and then I'll show you one little example where I'm using everything kind of all together, right? So this will be the last little example. So we're going to go glitching into onward, onward into some ambience, ambience into some, I guess, kind of like granular processing, and then into some multi-effects. So let's go ahead and let's play. We're going to turn on our modules. We'll set a loop on mood. Come over here. And there you have it. That's all of them working. It's a lot having them all go at the same time, especially since they're glitching multi-effects units, but just so you can see the workflow. So again, audio into here, audio into here, audio into here, audio into here. If you want to change them, you can unplug them and swap them all around. Now I'm back to the desk. That pretty much does it in terms of my pedal kind of workflow, the pedals that I'm using, why I'm utilizing them. As you can see, it's such a fun, kind of crazy process. You can really get lost in it. It's crazy in terms of sound design. I didn't even show this earlier, but here's kind of a drum loop that we have. Let's send that out to the pedals just so you can see what it sounds like on something besides that one synth. Now it's coming into the microcosm. Then I sent it through the Chroma Console. That camera was off, but kind of doing the same vibe that you just saw. There are so many cool possibilities with this. I cannot recommend getting pedals in your studio enough. I think it's something that everybody should have. I do want to go ahead and thank Shane Becker. You might have seen him on Instagram under Indian Run, or Mick Schultz. They were both really, really big and kind of like inspiring me to get pedals. They have so much kind of pedal content and pedal knowledge. So if you have any questions that I can't answer, maybe head up their DMs. They're both really, really great. And then other than that, thank you to Chase Bliss and Hologram for just making insane pedals. They've been so intuitive to get to know, but also have so many features that I haven't even dove into yet. So I can't recommend those enough as kind of your first couple pedals to buy. If it were me, I would say the first pedal to get would be the Hologram Chroma Console. It's by far the most simple to use, and it just gives you insanely usable results. And then I would try something like maybe the Onward to get those really weird granular glitches. And then the Microcosm and the Mood are just so insane for really diving in headfirst and doing stupid sound design. So definitely try all that. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Let me know if you're going to try out pedals in your studio. And if you have any questions about how I'm utilizing these, what do they sound like, how to actually get them set up in your setup, let me know. I'll try to answer as many comments as I can. But other than that, make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that you go check out our website, makepopmusic.com. And I will see you next Friday with more content. But until then, much love. Peace.